Yep.
Hi, I'm in conversation with Victor Kline today. We've been trying to do this for quite a while, but we're now in lockdown in Sydney, so no time like the present. Hi, Victor.
Hi, how are you?
So good to see you. Good. I'm going to do a bit of an intro for those who don't know Victor. Victor Kline started his life as a federal prosecutor. He's a barrister. He's the founder and director of the Refugee Law Project. Many people wouldn't know he's a published author, playwright, actor, director, producer, so many strings to his bow. But in most recent times, he's been ruffling feathers both on the right and left side of politics with his new party, the New Liberals, and his plan to prosecute the former Attorney General. Victor, I think we'll start talking about the prosecution and what that means first, and then later on in the conversation we'll talk about the New Liberals, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right. Can you explain to the greater public out there, what does a private prosecution mean? A lot of people never heard of such a thing, and can you give us a bit of a summary of that?
Yeah. So a private prosecution is absolutely in every way exactly the same as a prosecution that would be launched by the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions. The only difference is that the informant, if you like, is not the Director of Public Prosecutions, it's a private individual. I think to understand this, you need to know that once upon a time, this has been around for like 800 years, and if you go back a couple of centuries, all prosecutions would have been private prosecutions. But with the advent of prosecuting authorities, it's tended to largely disappear because we tend to rely on our prosecuting authorities to do the necessary job. But it's still there, and it's still on the statute books, and it's available. And maybe that's a good thing because in certain circumstances when it might be suggested that the police aren't properly doing their job, someone else can jump in and do it for them, so to speak.
So it's a bit of a gutsy move. The first I heard about it, I think, was you tweeting and said that you'd seen the dossier relating to Kate and Christian Porter. Can you, how did you see that dossier? How did you come to see that?
So it was released by the federal court. Porter was, as you know, suing the ABC and Louise Milligan for defamation, and he dropped that case. He obviously decided he couldn't win it, so he dropped the case. And documents that were prior to that confidential were released by the federal court. And this included the so-called dossier, which is a statement by, there's a couple of things. It's a statement by the victim, if you like. Well, she's known as AB, so we'll call her AB. She's known as AB in the court system, so we'll call her AB. And AB's friends who have written a covering letter to that. And this is what was initially submitted to the Prime Minister and that the prosecuting authorities had. So that came out, I think, the Thursday before last, and one of our candidates for the New Liberals, Vania Holt, who is a solicitor and an experienced prosecutor, worked for the DPP. She read the brief or the dossier, and she rang me up and she said, "You can't believe the evidence that's there."
Right. Well,
you know, and because prior to that, we were like everybody else, we get a snippet of this and that from the media. So I was very busy with a number of things, but by Saturday evening, I got a chance to read the dossier and I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
We both, Vania and I, have experienced prosecutors, although I haven't prosecuted for a long time. But through that and other areas of law that we practice in, we're used to scrutinising people's statements and seeing all the self-serving stuff and the spin and so on and picking that up. This was profoundly truthful. It just came across as profoundly truthful because she didn't spare herself. It was warts and all, and you just read that and you went, nobody could make this up.
Sure.
You know, This is the real thing.
Wow.
And also the dossier talked about various other pieces of evidence. So statements that she'd made to people in the past, contemporaneous notes that she'd made, a number of people who could give circumstantial evidence about them being together at the time, just a whole range of stuff. And of course, since then, there's been the revelation that Mr. Hook, Porter confessed to Mr. Hook that he'd had sexual relations with AB, that he'd had anal sex with her twice and oral sex with her once, which matches up exactly with what she says the rapes were. Yeah. And Porter, in his press statement, said that he'd never had sexual relations with her. So, I mean, the case has got kind of stronger since we took it up. But even when we took it up, so the question you ask yourself as a prosecutor is, would a jury properly instructed, or could a jury properly instructed convict? And we had no doubt that they could. And so our ethical duty was to then proceed with that and put it before a jury, not to be judge and jury ourselves, but to put it before a jury. Okay. Before we got underway, we made the decision. We initially toyed with the idea of me being counsel in the case. And then we decided that I wouldn't be, because I needed to be available to do things like what we're doing right now. Sure. This is not an ordinary case. This is probably the most high-profile political criminal case in living memory. And everybody in this country knows about it. So if I were the counsel in the case, I'd have to keep saying to you and everybody else, oh, I can't comment. And that would get incredibly frustrating for the public. So we decided that Vania would instruct somebody else to be the lead barrister, and I'd be available to do the sort of things we're doing now.
And actually leads me to something we were just talking about before we started recording. This is the first face-to-face conversation I think you've had in terms of media. I mean, this is Reclaim the News, it's a podcast. You haven't been on TV talking about this yet.
No.
No. It's almost like it's not happening.
It's like it's not happening. Well, I mean, the tweets that I've put up on Twitter, it's a fascinating thing. It's of the modern world. So you've got a Murdoch-dominated media who clearly want to whitewash Porter if they possibly can. And I'm not saying he's guilty, of course. All we're saying is we're prosecuting him and putting him before a judge and jury. But Murdoch wants to whitewash him, and so it's not in their interest to put me in their newspapers or on their television shows saying what I'm saying, because it's pretty damning, I think. But you have in the modern world this ludicrous situation where I'm getting 2 million views of my tweets every week.
Yeah.
And every publication in the country and every podcast in the country is talking about this. Mm-hmm. And it's all over. It's not just over Twitter, it's over TikTok and Facebook. And it's a really interesting question. I mean, how long can Murdoch hold the line and pretend this isn't happening?
Can I ask, are you allowed to say at this point where it's up to, the actual process?
With the prosecution? Yeah. So Vania is meeting with all the witnesses. She's in the process of doing that now and drafting the brief for the barrister. So she's got most of the factual material in brief form, and she's got a lot of witnesses to meet with. And we have a couple of crime squad, sex crime squad detectives who are working for us, and they'll take statements from the witnesses and put them in proper form and all that sort of thing. Wow. We want to get it done quickly. If the DPP were doing this, they'd probably take 6 months before they file the indictment. We don't want to do that. We want to get it done quickly because it is important, and people want to know and they want to see it happen. So We're hoping in a month's time we'll be able to actually file the case.
Okay, at that point, maybe the media will pick it up.
We'll see.
We'll see, I know.
We were saying off camera, weren't we, that can Murdoch ignore it right to the point where Porter's being dragged off to a cell? I don't know. We'll see.
Edit that bit out. No, we won't. We won't. No,
I take that back. We'll be dragged off to the cell.
It's all good. Hypothetical statement.
Hypothetically.
Yes, of course, allegedly. So I've seen some people, I've read people commenting on Facebook, etc., asking the question, does the victim's family, friends know this is happening? Do they approve? Are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, the victim's friends, and that's a wide circle of friends, who have been pushing for some sort of inquiry or proper police investigation for a long time. That group of friends where Joe Dyer, you would know, is the spokesperson, and you've seen a number of them on the media. They heartily approve of what we're doing, and they're behind us, and Joe is helping us, get the witnesses together and all that sort of thing. The family, I don't know, except to say that the family have never approved.
Yeah.
The friends went ahead and did this, despite the family saying, no, they didn't approve of it. But as my understanding is that was because they, well, I don't know. I'm just speculating, but the reports are that AB had a big rift with her family over this when she first said that she was going to go to the police and do a prosecution. They didn't want her to do it then, and I'm assuming they still don't. So it's a very delicate situation.
But certainly the friends that and Joe Dyer, they're behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So you'd have seen some criticism in the Twitter sphere, people saying you're doing this for political reasons because you are the founder of New Liberals. What do you say to that?
Well, we say we're doing it for Kate and for the justice, which is just screaming out for it.
Yep.
And because it's clear that the police authorities are not going to do anything, and something needs to be done. And quite frankly, we are doing it for all the women who have been abused and criticised and humiliated by the big swinging dicks inside and outside of Parliament.
Yep, not believed, not listened to.
Not believed, not listened to.
Yeah.
It's a moment. It's just a moment in history, isn't it? Where all these things have come together. This terrible scenario, this terrible situation of the victim taking her own life, the ongoing abuse by this government of anything female, and of course, what's her name? The ex-Liberal name slipped my mind. You know who I mean?
Julia Banks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The book out yesterday. And it's time someone stood up. And it just so happens because this is how history works. It just so happens that Vania and I are both ex-prosecutors, and we're in this party together. And I have enormous respect for her ability as a lawyer. I watch what she's doing, and she's great. So, that's why it's happening.
Look, at the end of the day, people will jump on things, they'll criticise, but you're doing something. You're doing something very gutsy.
We knew. Well, see, the thing is, we said it when we founded this party. We founded this party because we were disgusted with the crooks in government and the ineffectual opposition, and we knew something had to be done, and we promised ourselves that we would do the right thing, irrespective of what the consequences may be. And then we find ourselves through these circumstances in this position to do the right thing, I mean, there's just as many people saying to us that this will destroy the New Liberals. There's many people saying that as are saying, oh, you're going to get political advantage out of this. And what we're saying is, we don't know, we don't care, we're not going to address that. Like, this is the right thing to do, so we'll do it.
Yep. Well, as you said, every moment in history is people stand up, and you're standing up and doing something so important.
Well, we're lucky to be the people who are given that opportunity, I think.
Sure. Just before we move on, actually, to the New Liberals, so Christian Porter's lawyer, Rebecca Giles, she actually called the prosecution a stunt. Is that right? Yeah. And you sent her a letter.
I did.
The wording was wonderful. Have you had a response to want to summarise the letter?
I haven't had a response, no. Well, what I said to her was that if it's a stunt, then that means I am in direct breach of my ethical duties as a barrister to only engage in a prosecution. I'm not running it, but nonetheless, I'm, the driving force behind it, obviously. I'm only entitled to do that if I'm convinced on the evidence that a jury, properly instructed, could convict. If I do something for a stunt, then that's probably one of the worst things you can say about a barrister. And if it were true, I would have to be struck off the rolls. So I find it kind of ironic that a defamation lawyer could be so unaware of what she's doing that she can make such a clear defamatory statement. I mean, now what I'm doing at this stage is there's a provision in the Defamation Act of New South Wales where you can state that and say, I'm giving you the opportunity to apologise. And if you do, then it doesn't go any further. If she doesn't, I've really got to consider whether I bring the defamation claim. I don't want to just go willy-nilly into more litigation, but at the same time, I have a reputation to protect, Yes. So that's another aspect of it. But I mean, we know that we will be fighting on many fronts, with this government. We're also fighting, you may know that they try to stop us being registered as a political party, stop us using our name. They lost. Of course, they've now appealed that, and they're appealing it to a sort of internal panel in the AEC.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, it's only just happened. One of the panel members is the commissioner himself, Tom Rogers, who was appointed by the Abbott government, who was on a 5-year contract, was reappointed by the Morrison government, and will be up for reappointment again in 2024. And so who owes his appointment and his livelihood and his future appointment, he owes his livelihood and his appointments to the Liberal Party, and he needs to keep the Liberal Party in government in order to get appointed again. And so the first step we're doing is seeking to have him disqualified. So, they're going to throw everything they can at us, and we'll throw everything back. And we've always known that, because I think we are a real threat. There's just
which just brings me quickly to a question I've asked you before. You don't fear, because you are a threat, and you're being so gutsy and you're ruffling so many feathers. You don't fear the threat from them.
Well, no, because as I said to you off camera, what can they do to me? They can kill me, but I've had a long, happy life. So do I really care about that? And anything short of that, I can cope with. They're going to find something to say terrible about me. And, that will split down party lines. People who know me and people who see what I'm doing and they like what I'm doing will know that it's rubbish. And people who don't like what I'm doing and will jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, yes, isn't he a terrible man? Well, okay, it's so tired. How can you be frightened of that? They'll do that and they'll do 1,000 other things. But,
Which kind of leads me, kind of segues, if you don't mind, we're going to talk about the New Liberals and the word liberal. And like you said, people will find anything to say anyway. And so, I've been when did you launch the New Liberals? I was about to say I've been watching it for about a year, but
it's about a year effectively. It was formed probably 18 months ago, but the first 6 months were just doing all the formalities and so on. So we really didn't emerge as a party till this time, a little earlier, maybe 15 months. I think we've been going, because we did run in about this time last year in the Edmonaro by-election. Right. We were still very new, but I think we'd been around as an active party for about 3 or 4 months then.
Yeah. And so I've been the victim of trolling, a bit of discrediting in recent times, but not really in comparison to what I've seen thrown at you in the Twitter sphere, and presumably other places as well. And that comes from, as soon as people in Australia hear or see the word Liberal, so they automatically assume you are part of the Liberal Party as it stands now. You're a Liberal stooge, all of these things. That's coming from the left. And so if I just give a little bit of background of why I was fascinated to see the New Liberals pop up. So I grew up in the UK, as people probably can work out from the accent.
Yes.
And I mean, I was fascinated just to seeing these new parties pop up. Anyway, I think it's fabulous because, my goodness, we need some difference from the duopoly that's there now, the two major parties. And so, my first kind of memory of politics was really in the, early 80s in the UK, when the Liberal Democrats were a real force to be reckoned with.
Oh, Jeremy Thorpe and...
and then it was the two Davids, they were called. The two Davids, David Owen and David Steele.
Of course.
And so, and literally as a young teenager, I can't believe I'm saying these words now, in Australia, you'd be struck down to say I was a young Liberal.
Yeah,
I was a young Liberal in the early 80s. So when the two Davids were around, and if anyone doesn't know about them, they were a real force to be reckoned with as a sort of a third party at that time. And they would have been seen as progressive. So, so I was fascinated to see the New Liberals pop up and then read your policies. So, I guess the question to you is, and to answer the naysayers, what does the word Liberal mean to you? Because it's not what obviously the current party is about.
Yes. Well, I think you need to know that how it came about was we were just a small group of friends that decided initially to start this party, and we knew that we were going to create a classic Liberal Party as that's understood around the world and has been for a couple of 100 years. And one of the other promises we'd made to ourselves was we'd always tell the truth. And we knew we'd be buying into a lot of trouble if we used the word Liberal, but that was the truth of what we were. And if we balked at that hurdle of telling the truth, where would we go after that? So we decided to plunge in and call ourselves what exactly we were. And Liberal has a variety of meanings, but it's certainly not conservative. It's the opposite of conservative around the world. And I guess for us, we were going to be that classic Liberal Party that believed in equality of opportunity and compassion and justice and freedom, but freedom not in that libertarian sense, but freedom in the sense that, yes, you are free to do what you want to do, but if the exercise of your freedom impinges on the freedom of others, then there's a strong place for government to step in and stop that happening. I think the classic example that I always use is that if you're, a Liberal Party says to a multinational that wants to trade in this country, sure, you're free to trade in this country. But if in the process you pay no tax and thereby quite literally impinge on every other taxpayer in the country who have to carry the burden instead, then we're going to step in and make you pay tax, and what we found is that, and our psephologists tell us that there's about 4 million moderate disaffected Liberals around the country, and they've never had any problem with our name. What they have a problem with is what the Liberal Party of Australia has done to the name by perverting it to mean ultra-conservative. And a lot of them are looking for a real Liberal Party to vote for. And in many ways, we are a real Liberal Party, as we are the real inheritors of the Menzies tradition, at least on an economic front. In a lot of other ways, no, but certainly on an economic front, because we seek to pursue full employment, as he did, and make sure that people had security of tenure in their jobs and so on. And by full employment, I mean real full employment, 1.2%, not the nonsense they talk about, 5%, and it's really 15% because the other 10% are working 1 hour a week and they're considered to be working, and so on. So the small L Liberal, if you like, in the country who lost anyone to vote for have been jumping on without a second thought. Initially, we had a lot of trouble. Somewhere like Twitter, I mean, every second question I was answering in the early days was, "Oh, another bloody Liberal Party, you know, we don't need any more of them," and having to
exactly.
That's kind of almost gone. It's
but equally, we have to remind people on Twitter we are such a tiny echo chamber in that world anyway. It's fascinating to hear you talk about, was it 4 million you're saying disaffected Liberals? So I mean, when I first heard the name, I actually thought it's either sheer stupidity or a stroke of genius. Because
we didn't sort of set out to be either geniuses or stupid. We just set out to tell the truth, and this is what's happened.
You know what I'm saying?
I know, I do, and but Twitter's an interesting phenomenon because people say it's an echo chamber, but I've only got barely 7,500 followers, but I'm getting 1 million, or maybe closer to 750,000 views of my tweets every week. With the Porter prosecution, went well over 1 million, up to 2 million, I think. But so it's getting out there. And the other thing is that Twitter people are very politically literate. Yeah. And so you have stuff happening all the time. Like there's just one example, but it's my favorite, where somebody I don't know at all on Twitter says to me, it sends me a message saying, I'm really annoyed that the mainstream media is not talking about you enough. And okay, you've got some electronic coverage, but the old people, they still want to go and look at the Telegraph and its hard copy version and so on. She said, so what I've done is I've gone down to my local chemist shop on a Saturday morning because I know they all come in on Saturday mornings to fill their prescriptions, the old people. And I'm stopping them in the doorway and showing them your website and telling them all about you, So Twitter's got tentacles out there. And I think that's right. I think that, Uncle Fred, who bores everybody to death at Christmas, with all his political views, because nobody wants to be bothered about politics. What he's going to do is he's going to say, listen, you've got a choice this time. When they're all sitting there, bloody, who are we going to vote for? They're all ratchet, this sort of thing.
They're all the same as each other.
Yeah. And he'll say, no, hang on, there's a difference. And they'll listen to Uncle Fred because even though they say he's boring and he's always talking about politics, they know damn well that he actually knows something, So I think that it's
Do you think anyone will actually walk into the ballot box and accidentally tick the box from you Liberals thinking they vote, which would be fine?
I don't believe that at all. And the AEC said they don't believe it either, I think that if you look at a ballot paper and it says the New Liberals and Liberal Party of Australia, the word new means different. You can't be new and the same thing at the same time. I think it's very unlikely that would happen. And if it does, there's just as much chance people want to vote for us and vote for the Liberal Party if that's the case. But I don't think it's the case. And also, what several federal court judges have said, and that's why we won the case in the AEC, is that the Liberal Party is not entitled to what they call take a generic political word like liberal and box it up and make it their own property, But they used a lot of examples, but obviously the relevant one was liberal in that case. But they said you can't do it with anything, Labor or socialist or conservative. You can't make those words your own, So if they don't like it and they think that there's going to be some confusion, well, they have to deal with it by explaining to people who they are and not thinking that they have a right to rule and can just run everything according to their own corrupt methods.
Okay, which brings me to my next question. Good segue. You've said in your videos that if you're elected, you'll put them behind bars. Is that right? Is that those right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain to the uninitiated or people who aren't as engaged with what goes on as we are, what does that mean and why? Yeah,
well, we've got easily the most corrupt government since Federation, easily, like 100 times over. There's a wonderful document that some people might have seen produced by the Chasers that lists 904 instances of immoral, unethical, or straight illegal behaviour by this government in the last 7 years. And there's plenty of examples. People know about the sports rorts, for example, that's well known, but there's a lot of stuff like Barnaby Joyce buying water on behalf of the government from Angus Taylor and paying twice the market price, and then Angus Taylor taking his ill-gotten gains and sending them offshore to a tax haven, paying a donor 10 times the market price for land at the airport, at the new airport that they want to.
These things are quite complicated, and I think this is what so many disengaged people would say. But they all do the same. Everyone's as bad as each other.
Yeah, they are complicated, and it's very easy to spin them, and particularly if you've got large swags of the media, the Murdoch media on your side. And I think maybe just by the by, it's one of the reasons that the Porter case is also incredibly important, because it's very easy to understand. Yeah. Did this man rape this woman or did he not? And if he did, and if the Prime Minister, having seen the dossier, did nothing about it, and if the New South Wales Police, having a strong case, did nothing about it, well, what does that tell us about the way those people think? And then I think people are more receptive to understanding the depth and breadth of the corruption. So what we're saying is you need a federal ICAC with teeth. Now, there are various models of the ICAC out there. The Greens have one, the Labor Party has one, Helen Haynes has one. And they're all wonderful as far as they go, but they're just talking shops. They're kind of what you might call an ongoing Royal Commission. Now, Royal Commissions were wonderful once before corruption and post-truth entered our situation. Now, once upon a time, a Royal Commission would say, well, this was all terrible and, something should happen, and the police would jump on it and they would prosecute. Now, a Royal Commissioner says something and then, it gets filed away in the back of a cupboard and that's the end of it. So we're proposing an ICAC with teeth, and that means a body that has the power to investigate and prosecute, not just politicians, but also other members of government, because the judges and the bureaucrats are the second and third arm of government, and they all work in together, obviously, to create the government system, prosecute them for corruption or dereliction of duty or abuse of power. And that ICAC will have the power to do that, and we'll have a separate court called something like the Federal Court for the Prosecution of Corrupt Practices, where when the ICAC launches a prosecution, it'll go before an independent federal court, and the matter will be heard by a judge and jury. And if the jury convicts and the judge sentences, then that person will go to jail. And I'm guessing, I can't say it or promise it. That would be completely improper, because the idea of commissioning an independent commission against corruption is that you don't have the power to direct it. But my guess is that our independent commission against corruption would bring prosecutions against a number of current government frontbenchers, and some of them will go to jail. And we think that's necessary. And we're making that retrospective, by the way. And making something retrospective is a serious matter. Any lawyer will tell you don't jump into making something retrospective. But what we're saying is that the public have got so disillusioned with the political process and have lost all faith in the democratic system, and are watching, whether they can enunciate it or not, they're watching their country slide out the bum end and be the next Argentina. And so what we're saying to them is, if you vote for us, we will establish this ICAC and we will put the bastards behind bars, as we say. And if people do that vote and they see the ICAC set up and they see it function and they see people that they know have been corrupt go behind bars, then they say, my vote has caused this.
Yes.
It's my vote that made this happen. And then they re-establish their faith in democracy. But anything short of that, some talking shop where we say, oh, isn't this all terrible? And wasn't it terrible what Joyce and Taylor did? And wasn't it terrible what they did with this? And then it all just goes away again and they kick on as before. People are going to say, well, that's just the system looking after itself, you know.
And so how many, if we've got to have an election sometime within, was it by the end of next May or something?
Yeah.
How many candidates do you foresee you may?
Well, so what we ideally want to do, we made a unilateral decision not to run in Labor-held seats. We're not great fans of the Labor Party. We think they're not doing their job as an opposition. But our first priority is to get rid of this corrupt government. And so, for better or worse, we decided we didn't want to run across their territory. And so what we're doing is we're only standing in about 36 Liberal-held seats where we think we have our best chance. Because getting back to what you were saying before, sure, a lot of the left of centre people understand what we are now and that we're a progressive left of centre party, in fact. But there's probably still too many that don't know that and won't know that, and we won't have time to convince them before the election. So both for our own benefit of not wasting resources and for the benefit of giving the Labor Party a free run in their own electorates where they hold seats, we're only doing those 36 Liberal-held seats, and we'll be standing senators as well. Okay.
So there's also a big independent movement growing, gaining traction, and these voices of.
Yeah.
Did you need, this is me being devil's advocate, did you need a new party? Could you have
I think so because I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Indi model and what they've done. We just don't think that a group, let's say everything went to plan and the entire country was run by independents. It wouldn't be run by independents, it'd be run by the current government with independents in opposition. I just think it would be very, very difficult for them to formulate policy and get it through unless they form themselves into a group and then they're de facto a party, you know. Whereas, so I'm certainly not knocking them. And, you know, I've spoken to maybe now a dozen different voices of groups around the country, and we have a lot in common with them. And we, in every case, you know, we've come to a conclusion that we'll be able to assist one another with preferences and, you know, polling booths and all those little things.
That's really good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, I think, look, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we pulled off some of those 36 seats, maybe got 3 or 4 seats, and the independents got 3 or 4, and the Greens got 3 or 4, then you know, there wouldn't be a majority government, and the minority governing party would have to listen to what the people say, because we are representatives we are grassroots and we're representatives of the people, and so are these independence movements.
And it's incredibly encouraging that there's such a groundswell of these different things happening, which it says a lot.
I think that's right. And, you know, and talking about history, you know, they had to happen and we had to happen. If it wasn't us, it was going to be somebody else, you know, because you can't, you know, I think as you've said, the duopoly are now so indistinguishable from one another that they've just become a club to further their own interests. And, you know, you either end up, 2 things happen when that happens. You end up with an authoritarian state, or you end up with a grassroots movement or movements that prevent it going further and throw these people out.
All right. I'm going to give you, we haven't rehearsed this, but I'm going to give you 1 minute. Your favourite policies, or your summary of the New Liberals policies. So to tell the naysayers that you're not a Conservative party.
Yeah, well, our number 1 policy has to be the ICAC, because without the ICAC, nothing gets done. So even though our most pressing need is climate change, and we think the strongest climate policy in the country, that's our second policy, because first we have to get the ICAC in, so that we can get rid of the people that will stand in the way of climate change. And then the third policy, which really shouldn't be a third policy, but it is because we have this terrible situation with corruption and with lack of action on climate change. Our third policy is getting the 3 million people who live below the poverty line above the poverty line. And we're going to do that with a job guarantee scheme, and with that a non-compulsory job guarantee scheme where anyone who wants a job will be given a job, and at a proper living wage with security of tenure, and that will get the people who are below the poverty line above the poverty line, and will get us proper full employment. I guess they're our three prongs. My own, because I'm a refugee barrister, my own most important thing in my heart, I suppose, is getting those poor souls out of detention that have been there for years and years and are looking down the barrel of being there for the rest of their lives. That's the worst thing since slavery and the concentration camps, as far as I'm concerned. So I want that to happen too. And that will happen on day one, by the way, because that can be done by an administrative act. So if we get in there, then people will be granted bridging visas and get out of those hellholes they live in.
It's an amazing way to
hope that
end.
wasn't within the minute.
Well, it was more than a minute, but I let you carry on. And that's a perfect way to end. Thank you. I'm very conscious that I've got the light shining. So I should probably, we will stop recording, but thank you so much. I mean,
thank you. It's been
I mean,
really
I was
great
gonna edit this, but I think we'll put the full thing out there.